Do you have an announcement or?
Announcement. Welcome everybody, and congratulations to Dominic for a wonderful program, and we are very grateful for all the work he does to bring all the authors to Casa Italia, and it's a yearly program that he's been doing for how many years? 14 years. 15, yeah. And it's really a worthwhile program, so we're very grateful to you, Dominic, for doing this fantastic job. And congratulations to all the authors. Thank you all for presenting, and let's continue.
Okay, well, thank you very much, but I can't accept your praise without referring to the person who did all the work.
The person had Dominic, you're right. Actually, Dominic has asked Dr. Weiss to take over because he has said that he's slowing down. I don't believe him that he's slowing down, but he says that he is. So Dr. Weiss was kind enough to take over, so we're very grateful for you and all
Fine job. And another contributor to the success of the program is our next speaker, CJ Martello. You might be familiar with his column in the Fra Noi, Petals from Roseland, that he's been doing for the last X years, after it was done by Mario Avignoni for the last 50 years. And he's going, what's your subject is your latest writing?
Column.
Oh, the column.
Writing a column.
Okay.
There's a new author she wants to talk to.
Okay.
So other than being the timer for this event, I write a column for Fra Noi, Petals, in the Petals from Rosen column. I took it over from Mario Avignoni, who wrote it for many years, and when he got too ill to keep up with the column, I took it over. My background is that I grew up in Roseland and Pullman, and went to St. Anthony of Padua school, grade school, and came here for seminarian school. I studied to be a priest here for my first year and a half, and you are all sitting in what was my chapel. So it's like coming home. I know the older I get, the further back I go. I don't know what that's about. But I moved to the north side after I got back from Vietnam, met my future wife, and we lived on the north side. Divorced, a couple kids. My son is a commander in the Navy, and he's stationed in Naples for 3 years with his wife. And my daughter is a teacher. She has special ed, master in special ed, and she lives in Edison Park and teaches in Evanston. So a number of years ago, I decided I wanted to be a writer, and I've always yearned to be a writer. So I lived on the north side, and amazingly, at Belmont and Clark Street or Broadway, amazingly, there were no writer groups available. And I knew there had to be people that were interested. So I took it upon myself to start a writers group. At that time, it was legal to post notices on light posts, which you can't do anymore. I put notices in the Reader for a group, and I went to the library, and they said, as long as you don't charge for your group, you can have it here at the library. So I had my first meeting, and I had 37 people show up for the first meeting, which was quite an accomplishment. And I imagine they expected some college professor to stand up there saying, I'll run this writers group. And I said, no, it's going to be a little less formal than that. So I actually had 2 groups meeting, one group on one Saturday, one group on the next. And after about 6 months with the dropouts and people having other things to do, I combined it into one group, which met on every other Saturday. And I had that single group going for 3 years with 6 regular members that were always there. And since then, I belonged to 2 other groups concurrently, and one was for 8. One I ended up with for 8 years, and the other one for 10 years. But so that's my background in how I learned to write, and I still continue to learn how to write. And Fra Noi, my brother and I submitted a piece for Fra Noi on the Order of Sons of Italy in America, and then Paul Basil, the editor of Fra Noi, said, "Hey, we're looking for someone to replace Mario Avignoni. We have some submissions." So Fortunately, I was chosen out of the submissions that were given. And I threw myself into it wholeheartedly. Even though I lived on the north side, I joined Veneti del Mondo on the south side, the Venetians of the world. Spaghettios, nice name. It's a group of Roseland people, started out as Italians who met at a restaurant with a Wednesday night special. And someone threw around the nickname Spaghettios when they said, hey, say hi to the Spaghettios for me. So I joined Spaghettios. They've been meeting for 15 years now, and it's expanded from Italians to anybody that lived in Roseland. Friends and I started the Facebook page, Roseland Roundtable, because there was no Facebook site that people could go to. As a result of our starting our site, there's now about 12 different Roseland sites that have been started. Now, when I started writing my column, I didn't really know which direction to go in or what to do exactly, but my whole premise was to keep alive the spirit of Roseland. Because Roseland changed racially in the 60s and in the 70s, and a lot of those people scattered. They had such fond memories of Roseland that every little thing, like we had chopette, the Italian bread made at Ganella Bakery, and everybody would go there on Saturday night, stand by the back door, knock on the door, get a few, and then buy them Sunday morning after church. That was our big thing. So when I wrote about chopette, everybody's like, oh yeah, oh my God, chopette, where can I get some? It's like, I don't know. And then somebody came to Spaghettios just to see me from downstate Illinois to tell me that there's a guy in Rockford that makes chopette, you know? So I did. I went out to Rockford and met the guy and went to the bakery there, and he made chopette similar to what we had, but they weren't exactly the same. Now this is the thing, you know, like 50 years had passed since we had chopette and Roseland and all this. So when people would say, oh, but this isn't exactly the same, I'm like, look in the mirror. What do you see that's exactly the same as 50 years ago? You know, one of the things you got to learn to deal with the public is how to handle them in a nice way. So that's the thing. And then in Roseland, we had Gately's Department Store, People's Store we called it. And that's where it had everything. And it was second only to downtown. Because downtown, you had all the big stores. But if you lived on the south side or the east side, you went to Gately's. And so when I wrote about Gately's, that was another big deal. So the thing in writing the column is you got to consider your audience. Now I had thought about writing a column myself and couldn't quite find how to go about doing it and all this, but then I was fortunate that Paul Basil was looking for someone to take over the column. So as I said, I've written over 120 columns now. And in considering my audience, I've learned to focus the column on what they like, what they remember. You know, and then I've gone to Roseland Picnic that got started up on account of my column, you know, and then I've gone to these other meetings, and there's also a Roseland Pizza, Friends of Roseland Pizza Party that meets every 3 months, and all these people do is talk about Roseland. And actually the column is what started these different organizations. So my column, when I write it, as I say, I focus on what's of interest to them. Not necessarily what's interest to me, but like someone mentioned earlier, we all have similar backgrounds, you know, just different neighborhoods. And so people always appreciate those stories because they can connect to them. And that's what you want to do when you write something. You want to connect to your audience. You know, when I used to have my writers group, somebody be reading a story, and here comes this long word, this large word, and nobody has an idea what it means. That killed the story right there. Because if you take your reader out to try and understand this word that you love, they're no longer in your story. They have to go back into it to understand it. So when you write and you think of your audience, you're not going to, I call those speed bumps. You know, you're not going to hit that speed bump and mess up your story that keeping them involved. And that's the whole thing that I've learned in all the writers groups I've had. Plus, if you keep it pertinent to them, you know, like I've talked about playgrounds at the public schools and playing baseball with this rectangle drawn and the X in the middle and Daddy Longlegs. I don't know if all of you are familiar with Daddy Longlegs. A long steel pipe that went right to the cement ground. Now it's got to have shredded asphalt and all this around it, you know. But the way we were as kids, right? If you fell and you broke your leg, you're a dummy. You did it. So survive, you know. And that's the whole thing. But when I put that in this, one of my columns, everyone goes, oh yeah, and then they relate to other instances. One of the things in Roseland that we had at St. Anthony's, my sisters used to send me down to the church on Friday nights, because that Friday night bingo. I would go get bingo pizza, because they made rectangular pizzas for the bingo players, and you could buy it for 50 cents a slice. So my sister would give me enough money to get 3 slices, one for her and her girlfriend, and one for me. And I would go down there and I wrote that. I'd stand by the vent fan they had from the kitchen because the smell of the sauce and the pizza would come through there and smell that. That got a whole big response because you got to hit a nerve in your readers. You know, anybody could sit there and read a phone book. It's not going to mean much unless you run across your cousin's name. You know, so you got to be, when you write a column, and any one of you can write a column. And you know what? The pay in writing a column is writing the column. Okay? And that's the whole thing. It's like you can't start out and expect to make money at it right away. You know, because there is no pay. It's volunteer. And you get more out of it because you get your name around. You know, and that's the whole thing. Mike Ryko, you know, Michael Sneed, who writes for the Sun-Times, Richard Roper. Richard Roper's from the South Side. He grew up out in South Holland and Riverdale. And now everybody knows his name, and he's took over on the movie show, you know, and all that. So to start out, when you start out writing, your name's not going to be all around, but you keep working at it. One of the, you know, unless a fluke occurs. I'm sure all of you know who Lisa Scutolini is. Well, Lisa was a struggling writer until Coke did a Christmas promotion and put little books by women in 6-packs. And that got her name around. And now she's a multimillionaire, comes out with a book every 3 or 6 months, and now her daughter is her co-writer. So, you know, you never know. It could happen to you. You know, people say, oh, don't buy lottery tickets, you know, nobody ever wins. Well, someone wins. What's to say it can't be you when you win, you know, winning the lottery or writing a column or writing a book? You know, it's the same instance applies, where you focus on your audience when you write your book. You don't, if you write for yourself, you're not looking to sell books and write prolifically. I had one guy in my writers group, he said, you know, it takes 10 years to write a good book. And I said, no, I don't think so. I said, I would rather write 10 books in a year and have one come out successful than spend 10 years on one book and have it fail. You know, so it's, or unless you have a specific educational intent for your book. But honestly, think about it. Why would you want to sit there and write 10 years, slave away for 10 years on one book? But if you have a book in mind for 10 years, that's a different story. Just like I have one in mind for 10 years. So, and I'm at the point now that I'm retired that about time to write the book. I'm actually working on 2 books. I'm working on one that's the compilation of the 100, or the best of Petals from Roseland. That should be, I should be done with that this year. And then the other book I'm working on is about the Italian internment during World War II. I met someone the other night who said, I couldn't believe it, because I was at the Order of Sons of Italy Awards, Leonardo da Vinci Awards banquet, and a gentleman came up to me and says, I never knew that Italians were interred also. I heard that Japanese were interred during the, put in interment during World War II. But what happened is that Italians on the West Coast primarily, where many were interred, and they suffered terribly for it because they hadn't done anything wrong. It's just that the general that was in charge decided they're going to jail. They're a threat. And so he made a point of putting them in internment camps, which affected their families immensely. So, in closing, like I said, you know, the writer's road to success has to be based on passion and not profit. Because if you don't have your passion in there, you're definitely not going to be too happy, because the payoff is that it's your passion. And you're getting to express yourself and put your word out there for others. Thank you.
Thank you.
That man is also George Pullman.
George Pullman.
He does, what do you call it, an interpretation
I do
of
George Pullman, one man, a man in his model town. I do a half-hour as George, speaking of his life. And then at the last half is a PowerPoint presentation about the town of Pullman, its beginning, and its current status as part of the National Park System as Pullman National Monument.
Dominic.
Yes.
CJ is also the 2018, one of the 2018 recipients of the Leonardo da Vinci
Congratulations.
Award of Excellence. in journalism, did you get?
Correct.
Yes, yes. I was a recipient last year. He's a recipient this year. He's too modest to tell you.
Okay, our next presenter is back after, this is what, your third year, Kathy?
It is.
And Kathy, after her first appearance here a few years ago, became involved in just about every Italian-American organization meeting or event that I went to. Kathy was there, and I had sponsored some of those events, and I'm really pleased that she took the time to attend. So we'd like to take all the credit for getting you involved in the Italian-American community, but we know the credit belongs to you because you're just full of enthusiasm. Kathy DeNicolo.
Hi everyone, this is my third year, as Dominic was saying, at the Literati. Before I go anywhere any farther, I want to thank Dominic, I want to thank Anna for all of their work and support throughout the time. And it is true that I've come here now 3 times, and it's beginning to feel very much like home. And when I'm listening to the talks today, I know the reasons why. Because what I hear here at the Literati, Italian Cultural Center, at Casa Italia, it very much reflects my roots and the promises that so many of us had as we were growing up. Our heritage, the promises we made, the mission as to how we were going to become successful in our lives. My first book talks about that, Connected: An American Homecoming. It's, when I presented this book, I tried to relate to people what it was that made people travel to another continent. And here's the story of one woman, one man, one dream, 2 places. Italy, what, 4,000 miles away? The United States. Some people will not travel from one part of the city to another to get a job. Am I right? By the way, as I'm talking today, if something that I say resonates with you, just give me a thumbs up or raise that hand, and that makes me know that, as CJ was saying, that I'm connecting with you. But this idea of 2 continents, you know, the one woman, one man, one dream, 2 continents, 3 people, man, woman, and child. I mention all of that in my book. And why did I do that? For the same reason so many of you have written similar stories. I did it for, not this for, but for the generations that follow. Because these books, this is my new book, Sidekick. You look at these 2 books, I don't know what you notice about them, but Sidekick is my new piece. And when I wrote Sidekick, although it's very different in the way it's set up, basically these 2 stories talk about the same thing, in other words. And some of the things they talk about are the big ideas that connect us and move us forward, that make it easier for your kids, my kids, the generations that come, to have an easier time. We've heard so many people today talk about wellness in some level or another. The food that we eat, the practices that we follow. How many times do we hear that in the news? Nightly? Every day on the radio? See it in the newspaper? Not too much. We talk a lot about character in the news today. But mostly the characters that we talk about are not the characters that inspire us. How many instances today did you see that reflect character? A grain of rice, a presentation, going back to history. And I can go on and on and on and on. Great educational leaders, the food that we eat, how we stand by each other. A lot of stories in this room about character, but not enough stories in the world today about character. In this room, and why I came here to start out with, I found such a deep sense of community, of people saying, hey, let me help you with that. How much you get of that in the world today? Let me give you a helping hand. Don't you get a little bit more of it? I'm going to win. And if you lose, hey, that's the way it goes. So I wanted to talk a little bit about community in this new book, because I think that that's lacking in the world. Another thing I wanted to do was talk about communication. When is the last time that you talked to somebody at a holiday dinner without them looking at their phone? When's the last time you went into a restaurant and you saw a whole family and they were all on different devices? Communication. How many times have you gotten an answer lately that's 2 words? Because that's what you can text in quietly. Or maybe even more. How many times did you get an answer like this made up of letters?
W.
LMK. K. All right, all of those standing for something. The first time I came across the CU, I thought, this person doesn't know how to spell. Not so. But we're answering, this is how we're communicating with each other. And so these 2 books that look so very different and that deal with such very different topics really are connected by the use of these very powerful words that I'm trying to just advertise to you today. I can go on with the ties in these words and what they mean, but I'm aware of the time as well. And so it's a very nice thing to say, oh yes, I want to continue our heritage stories. I want to do that, but how? How can you pass your story forward? I bring this up because Dominic asked this question, doesn't your past deserve a future? Yes, but how do you do that? And that's where my newest book, Sidekick, comes in. The way we do it is by creating a certain, almost like a journal. This is a very small book. And yet, it's packed with big ideas. There are about 40 ideas in here as to how you can reach out to your family, your children, your children's children, how you can reach out if you're the coach in a volleyball or a basketball team, how you can reach out if you're an artist. These words and these exercises I thought I could put to the test today, so we'll see. You know, when I was growing up, I used to listen to a lot of people, and they had these one-liners. In fact, I used to listen so much to my mother in these one-liners. I used to call them Mother's Joe-isms, you know, because she had these one-liners that I could hear. I heard so often I could hear them almost in my sleep. I don't know if you have ever had that. If I say this, can you think of like somebody, good friend of yours, and they used to say something, and even today, when you're not with them, you can hear that. Anybody have any of those? Can you let me know what that is?
Oh, I have the same experience with my mother.
Yeah, and do you remember one of the things?
Yeah, I remember her. I have a terrible sense of direction, and she would always say, oh, you, turn your around twice in front of the house and you're lost.
Okay, So that anybody else have an expression or maybe something from a movie? Yes.
If you listen to the music, you have to pay the fiddler.
All right.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? Well, okay, I had the same thing. My mother's favorite was you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And I used to be so caught up in what I had to do, and she's telling me about lemon and vinegar and flies. But even to this day, when I see somebody being sort of cheeky, I'll say, hey guy, you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar.
My mom had one in Italian. Maybe somebody could really, I kind of have my own interpretation, I'm not sure.
Got a lot of translators.
Monta su e guardi pisa.
Something dead and
Monta su e guardi pisa, so I'm thinking climb the tower and look all over, but.
Like go fly a kite.
Yeah, like, that's what I'm thinking.
Right?
I don't know.
I think it's something like that. It would be like going to.
Well, I appreciate that. Yes, these things that you can hear, that you understand. If you don't understand
If you know what to
it
use
word
it.
by word,
Uh-huh.
you get the idea.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got the idea just by the look that they gave you. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we hear a lot on the radio. We have a lot of distractions. So that if we can hook on to some of these practices that I present in this book, something like lines from a movie, a song. Sometimes that's a way to draw people in because they have a knack. That's the way they really listen, by relating to drama or movies or things like this. And here's another one. We all have ways that we relax, right? When you're really, really wound up, what do? Think about it. Where do you go? A friend of mine, she says, anybody have any response on that?
Yeah, take a walk at the lake.
You take a walk by the lake. You go take a walk.
I pray.
You pray. And yourself?
Yeah, the same.
Pray.
Clean.
Get out the
I
road.
clean.
You clean. Somebody else says,
Cook.
I cook. All those are ways that you can draw somebody into a conversation. And that's what the sidekick is really about. It's about different ways of reaching out, passing on important lessons that will help your family, my family, the family of man, have an easier time. And I hope that once these conversations begin, that you will have so much to say that Dominic and Anna are going to be in their 500th literati, and that your stories will be written down. That's my hope for you. And this conversation starter of Sidekick is a way to begin. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Our next presenter is Carol Donka. Carol is new to our to us, and she is Carol. Are you Carol?
Yes.
Okay, she's a nutritionist, as she identified herself earlier, and is deeply involved with Italy and teaching nutrition on both sides of the Atlantic.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you both for hosting this, and Anna's been so good with the details. It's been wonderful. It's been a pleasure to be here and listen to the breadth of information and knowledge in this room. It's quite daunting, actually. So, yes, I am an integrative nutritionist and author and founder of Food Not Meds. So what the heck does Food Not Meds have to do with an Italian event today? Well, Food Not Meds is the name of my company because it is so important with how we feel, how we live. And the reason I was excited to come here today is because the Italian community has always had the answer to health But at the same time, we have lost it over the last decades. We've lost it even in a couple of generations. And part of the mission of my whole company is to raise awareness and inspire some change so we can sort of change the trajectory that we are on as far as our personal health goes. My story starts a long time ago. This is my family. My mother immigrated from Naples with my grandparents. I guess you could call her an anchor baby. She was born right after the boat arrived, practically. And my parents were, my father was families from Calabria. They were both firstborn. Showed up at school the first day, didn't speak a word of English. They worked hard. They didn't struggle, but they worked hard to integrate with the American culture. My father was, he was an elected official in the state of Wisconsin for 38 years. And while he was in politics, he was intrigued with the American system of government, but took care of the Italian people like you wouldn't believe. Yeah, you could just get rid of the next. No, next slide. So my mother was born on Taylor Street in Chicago, and my grandparents walked her over to Our Lady of Pompeii Church where she was baptized, and my grandparents had 9 children, and my grandfather said, I need a garden. I can't live here in this neighborhood. Taylor Street at the time had 13,000 Italian immigrants living in that neighborhood. There was no room for a garden. He didn't like it. He said, we're leaving. So I grew up in Wisconsin, just over the state line in Kenosha, and that's where we live. I resisted being integrated into American life. I didn't like hearing in school that America is the melting pot. I would sit there and think, I don't want to melt. I love my culture. I want to be Italian. I want to be who I am. And I fought that. Still to this day, I straddle both worlds. I am a citizen of Italy as well as the United States. I keep close touch with all my relatives in Italy, but it was an interesting time to grow up. So with the next slide, we're going to just fast forward now several decades. So several decades in my life, I met this wonderful man of Sicilian descent, and we were married, and we had a wonderful wedding. We went to Italy, of course, for our honeymoon. Life was good. I now had graduated from the University of Wisconsin with a degree in biochemistry, wanted to study nutrition. I had a couple of pivotal points in my life that really sparked my interest in nutrition and knew that's what I would do the rest of my life. One of those pivotal points was when I was 14 years old in junior high school and opened the lunch that my mother would send me to school with. And the kids around me couldn't identify what was in my food, what my lunch was. It was walnuts and dried apricots and, a homemade cookie and thermos of water. And I started to look around and wonder, why do they eat like this? Why do I eat like this? What is this doing for us? So I went to school, got the degree, got a job in the corporate world, began to get more and more assimilated into the American culture. But, no, stay on that slide, please. But 3 years into the marriage, another pivotal experience occurred, and that is that my husband had a heart attack.